When I was recording my first EP, I wanted to find a drummer to play on one song. Luckily, I found John O'Reilly Jr., who is not too far from me, but he recorded all his tracks remotely and sent them to me digitally. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit his studio and see where he records and teaches and talk about his gear and interview him about his process for recording remote drum tracks. I hope to make more of these kind of videos in the future. I know there's a ton of studios and musicians very close by to me, so I've been reaching out and trying to connect with other people, and hopefully this will be the first of many. So please be sure to like and subscribe, and hope you enjoy my interview with John O'Reilly Jr.
Great.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So this is your studio.
Here we are.
Let's head on in.
So I've had the studio for about 14 years or so, and I moved to Pennsylvania in 2009, and at the time I had a job as a drum editor for an educational music publishing company called Alfred Music Publishing, and I did all their drum set stuff, and I had that job in Los Angeles where I lived before I moved here, and when I got here I was just doing it from home, and then they laid off a ton of people, and my part of the puzzle there was very insignificant. So I was in the first round of layoffs. And that was the point where I was like, all right, I'm going to figure this out and do the recording thing on my own. Because I'd started to move in that direction. I'd started to amass gear. And of course, it was losing a job and then spending a boatload of money on a studio and renting a space to put it in. But within a year or so, it really started to pay off. It took a while to kind of get it up and running. Luckily, I had a few friends in the business who hired me to do stuff right from the get-go, which is why I started it to begin with. I was being asked more and more, like, hey, can you record from home? As budgets shrank and the need arose to be able to just do it on the cheap and do it quickly and remotely and all of those things, I realized that it was a good idea. So I would say about a year after I got it up and running, I sort of rebranded the website to Boom Crash Drum Tracks. And that inspired a whole new crop of people to just find me online. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. I think that I got in on this remote recording thing a little earlier than a lot of people did. So I sort of capitalized upon the fact that there weren't a ton of people doing it at the level that I was doing it. I've always been, adamant about having a space that sounds great, not having it just be like a spare bedroom or whatever, like really having it sound like a real deal studio and treating the room and getting all that settled, in addition to having great gear. So actually when it started, it was in a different location in the building that's actually next to where I am now. And it was a much smaller room, much lower ceilings, but I made it work. And then I got kicked out of that space because they were renovating that part of the building. And I moved into this space, which, this used to be a garage that I've now converted into what it is now. So I had to build a wall. I had to put all this treatment in here to sort of make it sound okay. Because it's, honestly, it's like cinder block walls, concrete floor, and it was pretty rough. And the guy that I rent from made it clear, you can rent this space, but it's up to you to make it livable.
So what are do you know the exact dimensions? You do have some good height up here.
Yeah, it's like the ceilings are like 15 feet or so. And, I think of it as being like 750 square feet, okay. 800 square feet, something like that, which to me is perfect. It's enough room, especially vertically, it's enough room for the drums to sort of breathe and do their thing, but also not so big that it's cavernous sounding. So I also, part of the process of doing that was building this umbrella thing over the drums, which is, just compressed fiberglass panels in this thing here, and it's a kayak mounting system is what that is that I got
so
from
these
Dick's.
ropes, it's kind of tied up into the ceiling.
Yeah, so it just
and then hangs down.
Totally.
Yeah.
So it's just on a pulley system, and I can really, if I pull it all the way up and I get rid of these panels on the side of the kit, it really opens up the space. If it's like big, huge, like Green Day drums, I can really make it sound like that. And I can also get like full-on Steely Dan vibes by lowering that, I have another one of these panels I can put in front of the kit. Sometimes I even put blankets. I like enclose the whole thing to get a really super dead sound. So
you have the space, you can take advantage of the reflections of the live room, but then you can also, with treatment, control how much of the room you want to capture.
Totally. And, honestly, for the most part, it usually kind of stays where it is right now, which is fine for most things. It's only if I'm looking for one extreme. And usually that's dialing it back and making it smaller sounding more than, because nobody really wants big, huge rock drum sounds anymore, which is too bad. And I'm lucky when I do get to do that. But yeah, it's pretty customizable in that way, which is great. And the space, and then I'm allowed to have, with the space that I have, even if I have a tighter drum sound here, I have 2 sets of room mics so that I can really, give people the option to have whatever kind of ambience they want. That's sort of the whole premise here, is that I'm recording probably a lot more than I need to and providing tracks that people can, kind of use to however they want and dial in whatever kind of sound they want, which is obviously somewhat dictated by me, but I try to make it be a little bit dealer's choice as much as possible.
And so you have a bunch of kits over here. So you have things you can swap out, obviously different snare drums for different sounds. How much of that is your choice versus what the customer asks for? Do they usually know what they want, or are you able to suggest things or try different things and kind of use your expertise?
Yeah, it runs the gamut, of course, but I would say for the most part, it's either someone has something very specific in mind or they have no idea. So I love when people give me something to aim for, like I like the drum sounds on this and this and this or whatever, and then that gives me an immediate idea of what I should do. But I think more often than not, especially with people I've worked with before, they kind of just trust me, and they know that I'm going to dial in. So, and the reason I have so many drums, because honestly, it's overkill with the number of drums that I have, but I keep things tuned so that I can just swap things in and out. For the most part, I keep the mic set up the same, and then I swap drums in and out to get different sounds. So if I need to, be working on something that's like a real dead kind of, Steely Dan kind of thing, and then something that's a little more organic and open sounding, I can sort of keep the mics, the preamps and everything the way they are, and just swap out the drums. And then if I need to do revisions, I can swap back. And I try to make it as seamless as possible between having to do, get back to drum sounds that I've used before. That's a big part of the trick here, is allowing people to have time, like send a track and then allow people to have a couple days to mull it over. And then but I need to work in the meantime.
Right, so you may have swapped the drums out 5 or 10 times, but then they come back and they want that same sound, just a different part, and you've got to be able to recreate it.
Totally. So until something is finalized, I keep everything tuned the way it was. And, if the temperature changes, it might affect things a little bit, but for the most part, it works. It works pretty well.
So from the time you get a project, how many, does it usually take a couple of days, weeks? Like with that feedback, it kind of back and forth, do people generally need a lot of revisions, or does it just depend on? It
totally depends. Yeah. And it really, but for the most part, my experience is like, lately my method has been like do a couple or 3 takes, send them all. And then it's either like, great, I've got plenty to work with between those 3 takes. Send them all to me and I'll comp together what I want to use. Or it's like, cool, I like what you did, and this part in take 1 and this part in take 2, whatever, and I'll comp it together for them. And then sometimes it's like, that's all great. Give me A, B, and C that I need, beyond what you did already. But, sometimes it's like, yesterday I did a song for a guy, I did 2 takes, and he was like, great, send me the files. Yeah. And it was literally, 2 hours after I started, I was sending him files, and that's great. At the same time, there's someone I'm working with now that I'm on like revision 12, I think, which is like a little bit of a nightmare. But I know this. I've worked with this person before, and I know that that's what I'm getting into. Right. And so I feel like it balances out. Usually, it's pretty quick between start to finish. Not that it really bothers me to have it take a long time, but other people, like the other thing I'm working on right now is for a guy who's in Australia. So when I start, he's going to bed, and so I do my thing, and then I know I'm not going to hear back until the next day. And then he might have some, things that he wants, and then I do it again, and I know so there's like a day in between, or at least 24 hours in between every bit of it, which is fine too. But that's again, that's why I keep things set up the way I do, so I can work on other things while I'm waiting for feedback on that one thing. And it's a bonus if it's someone who's like there and ready to critique. And we can sort of do it in real time, more like it would be in a real studio.
Cool. Well, why don't we look at the drums? We'll talk about this kit. I know you have a really interesting company behind this kit and all your other gear, the mics and everything.
Yeah, well, as far as drums go, this kit is actually, this is a 1965 or 4 Ludwig kit that is one of the newer kits to me. I guess maybe that's not really true anymore. But this is sort of my go-to kit for most things. Sort of tubby, the older Ludwigs are mahogany shells, so they're a little bit warmer and kind of punchier, and I love that sound. 20-inch bass drum, which I'm also a big fan of in recording world. So this is kind of the go-to. That snare drum, also sort of my go-to. That's by a company called Tamburo out of Italy. They are someone that I actually am an artist with. They make these incredible drums. It's really just a few guys on the east coast of Italy, on the Adriatic. And they just make these beautiful drums that are, I have 2 different types of kits. One are like stave construction, which is just a unique, way of building drums. We don't need to get into the specifics. I could go on and on about it, but it's a really, kind of, what's the word for it? Like real dialed in sort of, concise sound. Okay. And I have another kit that's usually my jazz kit. That's a different construction. That's really thin shells, plywood, with sort of like a melamine coating on the inside and out that allows them to be super strong and super thin, and they're gigantic sounding. And they're really cool for the jazz thing just because they really sing. But I love those drums. But in terms of what I like those Tamburo kits, I use the snare drums all the time. I've got a metal snare drum from them that is one of my favorites, and this drum is one of my favorites. They're kind of my go-to snares. But the older Ludwig drums, I'm also a big fan of. So I've got this Ludwig 65 or 64 kit. I've got a 1970s Ludwig kit with psychedelic coating. I've got the bass drum for it too that lives on my student kit right now. But, so like I said, I keep things sort of set up for specific sounds. So this older Ludwig kit is kind of tubby, shorter tom sounds, punchier. I keep double ply heads on them, so they're a little bit more attack. These I keep a little bit more wide open. So even though they're later era drums, I kind of think of them as being kind of a, an earlier sort of, wide open sort of sound. So like earlier Beatles as opposed to later Beatles. This is a new kit to me. That's a 1950s Ludwig kit that is really cool sounding. And I just got it a couple weeks ago. It's been a friend of mine's. One of my best friends has owned this kit for ever. And he recently gave it to me, which is awesome. So I'm still sort of figuring those out, but they sound older, which is really, really fun. And then, snares. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Ludwig acrylites, which are these guys. This is an older one from the 60s. I've got one from, I think, like the 70s, this guy. You can sort of tell by the badge. I think that might be, actually, this is probably 80s. And this one's like from the 90s. But honestly, they're like exactly the same drum. I put some different rims on this to make it sound different. But those are incredible. Those are sort of the go-to. And who I learned that from was the drummer from Jimmy Eat World. Is a big fan of those and uses them like half the time. And I remember him telling me about them years ago. And I was like, I started buying them up whenever I saw them. Because you can get them really cheaply too. You can find, people have sort of caught on, but it used to be that you could find them for $100, $150. And just a combination of metal drums and wood drums. This is my Tamburo aluminum drum, which is very similar to the acrylites, actually. You can see its construction, but it's deeper. Yeah. So it's similar sound, but just a little fatter and bigger. And, this is sort of the Bonham snare drum, Black Beauty. It's a pork pie Black Beauty copy. This is a birch drum, which is great for like country sort of thing. Yeah, just sort of thicker, fatter, but kind of ringy. This guy sounds ancient because it is. This is an old WFL drum from the 50s. I'm trying to get the badges. Oh, this one, that's right. This one doesn't have a badge. This one, same deal. I think this one does have the badge. This is a 1950s WFL, which is like pre-Ludwig. William F. Ludwig had his company before. Yeah. So that's a cool drum. This is a Tamburo Unica series, which is the thinner birch ply shell with like this melamine. It's like Formica on the outside. It's great. So they're so durable, but man, they sound incredible. This thing sounds huge.
So with the sponsorships for the drums and things like cymbals or sticks, like do they usually approach you? Do you reach out to them? How do those relationships typically start?
That's a great question. With Tamburo specifically, Tamburo has been around since the 80s, but they started this campaign to become prevalent in North America, and there's a parent company called Pro-L that owns several different brands. One is a keyboard called Decibel that they started with in the U.S. and Canada, and really started to take off. Like Stevie Wonder uses Decibel keyboards, and Beyonce's musical director uses Decibel, and they're incredible. And they saw, how things really started to take off. And so they figured they'd wanted to try the same thing with the drums. This was just before the pandemic hit. A buddy of mine is the CEO of Pro-L North America. So he came to me and said, hey, we need someone to be a artist rep for drums so that when I try to sell the drums to Guitar Center or Sweetwater or whatever, I have someone who can come with me as a drummer and really speak drum stuff and demo the drums and do all this. And the idea was for that to all start. This was literally the summer before the pandemic hit. So I went out to Italy and checked out their factory and, met the guys who make the drums and did the NAMM show with them. And then the pandemic hit. And so the good news is they've had really great luck, and the drums have indeed started to take off in the States. But I have had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, well, you mentioned somebody that I interviewed previously, Dorothea Taylor, who's got like a massive following on Instagram and TikTok and stuff. And,
yeah. She's a timbre artist.
She's one of their artists.
She is. Yeah, she's been great for them just to get, I think that they, the guy who heads up the Pro North America, I used to work with at the publishing company at Alfred Publishing. He was the guy who was the sales guy to all of the big chains like Guitar Center and Sam Ash. And so he knows the education world really well. And he's enlisted some of those people. Dave Black is another one. He's a famous author and concert band composer and great drummer. So he's one of their artists. They just signed a guy named Fred Dinkins, who's he's taught at the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles forever. And it's great. Those people just, because they sort of help spread the word. But they're really, I haven't, as you can tell from my drum collection, I haven't bought a new drum in as long as I can remember.
Yeah, this rack screams vintage to me, and I love how it looks, and I'm sure they sound even better.
Yeah, they sound great, but I was skeptical of these new drums, and when I got the two kits that I got, I was shocked at how amazing they sound. So they're my two live kits. For jazz gigs, I use this kit. It's the snare drum I keep here a lot, but this is the kit, and it's all in these cases. Sorry, there's not. But those drums, this is their other series called Opera, which is a stave construction, and that's my main out of the house kit. Although if I have to rock out super hard, that's the kit that I put up here because it's loud and amazing sounding. But so that was a unique situation in terms of an endorsement, and and I don't really consider myself as being even though I am technically an artist with them, I think of myself as like a demo artist or like an ambassador for their brand. But I've had a deal with Istanbul Agop cymbals for a long time. That started in 2007 is probably when that was. When I've just been a fan of their cymbals, and for people who are interested in how this whole process works, I just had a buddy who had an endorsement with them, and I happened to be getting a gig at the time touring for Mandy Moore, who's like a singer-songwriter. She's also an actress. But I was going on a 3-month tour with her and went to Istanbul Agop. There are two Istanbuls. There's Mehmet and there's Agop, two brothers that took over the company from their father, and I think there was some sort of disagreement. So they split into two different companies. Similar to Zildjian and Sabian. That's the history between those guys, two brothers who split. But the and the Mehmet ones are fine too, but these Agop ones really are spectacular. And so I just, got the artist rep, information and asked him to meet. And, those companies, anytime you're getting an endorsement, I think that the thing that people don't understand is that, there's a reason for doing it. It's not just because they like you or whatever.
They want to give you free stuff. Yeah,
totally. And nor is it ever, in my experience, I'm sure for some people it's free, but it almost never is free. Right. But they need you to be doing something that is going to get their brand, out into the world. So for me, it was that tour. Not that it was a super high visibility tour or anything, but it was a reason for them to be like, yeah, sure, we'll give you a deal on cymbals. And I think because of the studio stuff, that's sort of continued. I use them on everything, and I'm obsessed with them. If you think I have a drum problem, I have more cymbals than I have drums for sure. And the only other endorsement I have is with Evans Drumheads, which is owned by D'Addario. I actually used to work for D'Addario as a merchandising rep. Oh, wow. Yeah. I lived in New York for about 5 years, and I was playing in bands and doing some recording, but mostly just playing. And I was out of town touring a bunch, and it started with Alfred Publishing. They needed a merchandising rep to go into Guitar Centers and Sam Ash's to fix up the book displays. And then word got around that I was doing that. I would cover everything from Boston to DC. And I would hit every store once a month. It was a great gig. I would just do it during the days and then have gigs at night. And I could go away on tour for a couple of weeks and still be able to get everything done when I was home. So D'Addario got wind of me doing it. And so I started to do that for them. And, with their strings and everything, but mostly the drum heads and, like pick displays and stuff like that. And then Vic Firth drumsticks, same deal. They heard of me doing it, and so I started to do the same for them. But so it was sort of through that I was, friendly with the artist rep at D'Addario, and so I was able to get the Evans endorsement, and I've had that for years too. And now they own ProMark drumsticks, which I use now too. I had a Vic Firth endorsement that expired, and I just let it go and moved to ProMark, which I actually I like better. So it's great. I'm lucky that I'm able to have these endorsements because it makes, especially here in the studio, I'm changing heads constantly because it just sounds better. So having that head endorsement really helps because I save a lot of money. Same with sticks. I don't really go through a lot of sticks because I'm not that hard a hitter, but being able to experiment with different sticks and not have it break the bank is huge. So yeah, my advice to anyone thinking about doing that is think about what it is you're doing and why you might be an asset to the company that you're looking to get an endorsement from, because that's what they're looking for too. And it doesn't have to be much. Even if you're teaching a lot, I think I have a handful of students that I teach. I have like 7 students that I teach right now. And the way I see it, all 7 of those students are definitely using ProMark sticks because I'm giving them stuff usually, for them to try out. And then they go and buy the things. Same with heads, they see me using heads when we talk about tuning drums. They see these heads. And so when they go to buy heads, that's what they're going to buy. And if they're anything like me, you kind of stick with what you know. And so then there's a lifetime of drum heads that are being bought by this person as a result of you being an ambassador. So, yeah.
So let's talk about mics real quick. I want to talk about, there's some really cool mics up here that I'm fascinated by. Can we start at the top with these guys then work our way down?
So, okay, we're talking about these?
Yeah.
So these are Coles 4038s that have been around forever. They're, the BBC had them made by the Coles company back, like in Abbey Road days. I think.
How did you did you just buy these?
No, so these are a weird one because they're actually not mine.
Okay.
They're friends of mine's. I'll tell you about these people that are lending me these mics when I get to my outboard gear. But I've had them for years, and they every now and again need them back for something or other. Okay. But they have they have different microphone needs than I do. They also come in here to record stuff a lot, so they know that they're here, and I'm keeping them safe because they're a little expensive. But they're ribbon mics, so there's pretty fat, long ribbon in here, and they just get a really great natural sound. My aesthetic with recording the kit is to try to get as natural a sound as possible, similar to what it sounds like me sitting at the kit, as opposed to getting just the cymbals. It's like a lot of times people put up overheads and think, okay, I'm just miking the cymbals, and they put them over the cymbals. Like I put these over the toms to get kind of a more accurate picture of the kit. Make sure they're equidistant from the snare drum and the bass drum, kinda. And they get more of a natural picture of the whole kit. They're also figure 8 because they're ribbon mics. They're figure 8. Okay. So this thing helps in that there are no reflections, and the ceiling's tall enough. It doesn't really matter anyway. But there are no reflections really coming down from above. That's the one thing you have to be careful though with ribbon mics, as overheads especially, is that you are going to get a lot of overhead things. So sometimes if I want to just make these a little bit more precise, I'll bring this cloud down and have it be really close, so they're really not picking up anything from behind. So that's those. This is it's a copy of a Neumann 48. Is that what it is? Yeah, 48, like a FET 48. So there was a tube 48 and there was a FET 48. This is not a tube mic. It's just a regular condenser microphone, made by a guy near Vancouver called Advanced Audio.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah. He's incredible. Dave is his name, I think. And he makes, largely sort of replicas of other microphones. I'm sure he does other things, but this guy is really, really great. And I just had it serviced actually a few months ago, and we put a different grill on it, and it sort of changed its thing. Because what it was initially was actually a FET 47. Is that what it is? I'm so bad about numbers, but I think that's whatever the go-to bass drum microphone, like outside bass drum microphone. I think it's a FET 47. Different grill on it, and when I had him make it, he didn't have the right body, which, because that mic normally is just a cardioid mic. So he was like, I just don't have the right body, so I'm going to wire it so that it has a figure 8 pattern and an omni pattern, in addition to a cardioid pattern. Sent it to me, and that's where I used it for years, and then I tried it in this sort of mono overhead place when I got the new grill on it, and it sounds awesome. So it's sort of bad because this is a pretty, it's a really natural sound, not super defined. This is, partly because it's mono, but also because it's a little bit closer and right above the snare drum. This is sort of a little bit more of a pointed sort of picture of the kit. So the combination of those sort of work together really well. In addition to this microphone, which a lot of people refer to as the crotch mic because it's down there.
And that's a SM7B.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I have it, kind of crunched a little bit. I'm overdriving the preamp that it goes into because I love that sound. But that also is getting like another kind of mono picture of the whole kit. Obviously, mostly the drums because, it is a cardioid mic and it's getting a lot of the snare drum, a lot of the bass drum, but equidistance from the tom, so it's getting that whole thing. So I would say this mic, this mono overhead, and that mic are sort of have similar jobs. And then what else?
Cool. Let's talk about you want to come around and show the bass drum?
Oh yeah. So bass drum, I'm obsessed with this microphone that's inside the bass drum. Here, let me pull it out for you. So this is made by a guy in Perth, Australia, named Dr. Alien Smith, and it's his Alien 8 microphone. Okay. And it's cool. It's actually 2 capsules with a switch, so you can choose to have both of them active or just the top one or just the bottom one. And I believe, I might be wrong about this, but I think that they are the same capsule, which essentially is the speaker from from headphones. Oh, wow. That has been, rewired to become a microphone. And it's a figure 8 pattern, but they're facing different directions. So the front one is, the top one is facing forward, the bottom one is facing back. So if you have it both engaged, inside the kick drum, you're getting both heads. You're getting the attack of the front head and the resonance of the resonant head.
Yeah, wow.
And I've never been happy with bass drum microphones until I got this guy. I mean, it's like almost too much bigness, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
I just was experimenting this morning actually with setting it to have it be just the front mic or just the top mic to see if that changes it. And it has something to do with this bass drum. This is a real resonant drum. And so the back head can get a little overwhelming. So this guy is just a ribbon microphone. It's made by Cascade, which no longer exists. So it's just a really warm, round, picture of that kick drum. Angled the way it is so that the air from the kick drum doesn't, mess around with the ribbon. You have to be kind of careful.
That's what I was wondering too, because typically with ribbons, they're more sensitive than regular mics. So the angles.
You got to be careful a little bit. And also, with any figure 8 mic, you've got nulls above, below, and to the sides of that microphone. So here, the null of the top null is pointing at the cymbal, so I'm hopefully not getting as much cymbal bleed. Whether that really makes a difference, I don't know. But I did a session recently where somebody was using large diaphragm condensers on the toms, and these are Audio-Technica 4050s. I think that's 4050. And man, they sound amazing on the toms. I'm sort of pissed that I haven't used them ever. I used to use these as my overheads, and I still will every now and again. If I need like kind of a more modern, brighter sort of like rock thing, I'll put those up. And I have some people that I've done tracks for that know that I use the Coles and are like, use the Audio-Technicas instead because they want like that brightness, because you don't get that from the Coles. Although what's interesting with the Coles, or any ribbon microphone really, is EQing them after the fact is so much better somehow. I don't really understand why that is. Something about how they capture everything. You can really dial in the EQ after the fact, because the reason I prefer them to these is these get a little crispy. Despite the fact that I use like super dark cymbals all the time. But so anyway, that's tom mics. Snare is simply a SM57 on the top with the Grinelli mod that gives it the little elbow. Yeah. And it's an Audio-Technica 4033, which is pretty similar to this microphone actually, but even brighter on the bottom snare, which I love. Because people tend to discount bottom snare mics sometimes. And I feel like that's a mistake, because there's some magic that really happens there. So that, and then, I have a couple sets of room mics. These are the same as what's out on the outside kick, these Cascade Vinjets, long ribbon mics. I've messed around with so many different combinations of these, so these are kind of like mid-room. I've messed around with them being on opposite sides of the room. I've experimented with them in Bloomline, so they're on top of each other. And this somehow seems to sound the best. I think part of it has to do with this room. As soon as I get them any distance apart, the room is so irregular. And, just in terms of what's happening on each side of the room, and it never sounds like a coherent stereo image. Somehow this worked. I mean, I guess it's kind of like, ears.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But they're facing exactly the same way.
Right.
I've messed around with putting them at 45-degree angles or 90-degree angles. I've tried all of it, and this is so far what I've come up with as being the best.
And then you've got some.
Yeah, these are actually, these microphones are made by that. Their Icon is the name of the brand, EIKON, and it's made by the same company, Pro-L, in Italy, and they're also ribbon microphones. And I have them positioned like this, basically just to get, so they're not getting any direct sound from the drum, so they sound even farther away than they are. They're up against this thing, so they're not getting any reflections off the wall. And they just kind of capture a different ambience, but they sound really far away. It's cool. I mean, I almost never use them unless I'm going for like this really weird, gigantic sounding thing. But that's the purpose of those mics.
And then you've got a lot of room treatment up on the walls here. Yes. Did you build these yourself, or?
I did actually. Okay. There's these panels that are compressed fiberglass. It's called 703 Corning, yep. Owens Corning 703. Yeah. So I get them from ATS Acoustics, and they're just covered in. The thing is there's like definitely formaldehyde in those things.
Yeah, so, you got to be careful.
Yeah, so I covered them with like a kind of wrap, but not plastic. I read some people like to cover them in plastic to try to contain. I'm sure there's a very small amount of formaldehyde, and only if you're like ingesting it.
I think more, yeah. If you're touching it and then it, it's itchy and then getting that close. Yeah.
Right.
I think as long as they're contained,
Yeah, I put like a real thin fabric over them, and then the fabric that you see on the outside of it as well. So they just have like little wood frames around them to sort of keep them contained. But they're great. But the red ones are actually wool. They're and kind of like they're sort of more like bass trappy things. Like you see, I've got one in the corner over there that's not doing a thing really. But up in the corner over here, I've got one. In my old studio, I had them set up. The corners were more of an issue in that studio, and I had them set up in the corners. Here, with these panels with the paintings on them, those are kind of acting as bass traps in those corners. So they're keeping anything from building up back there.
Yeah, that is one of the first things you notice when you come in the room is all this artwork. Can you talk about where this comes from? And
so it's a guy named Steve Keen, who's an artist out of Brooklyn, New York. And he's an interesting, I've never met him, but I've been in other friends' studios that have had his artwork there, and I've always just been a fan. And what he does is he production lines paintings. He'll do like 50 of one painting and does like, one color, all of them. The next color, all of them.
Okay.
And when you buy paintings from him, you can buy, every now and again, he'll put up something that's like a set. Like he'll do a lot of album artwork, like I was in a restaurant in New York not too long ago that had like 4 Smiths album covers on the wall that Steve Keen had done. And, but for the most part, when you order stuff from him, you get like a pack of 5. It might be different now. I got these probably, 13 years ago. But you order some, but you don't know what you're going to get. So it's like $75, and it used to be really cheap. I don't think it is as cheap anymore because he's gotten a little bit popular. But you'll get, 5 paintings for $75, and he just sends you whatever he has at the time. So I wrote him and was like, hey, I need, I've seen your stuff before. It's always been on wood. It's always been around this size. Part of, I love your artwork, but I'm also using it to be like a diffusion wall in a recording studio. And, if I order a ton, are there going to be duplicates? And will they all be on wood? Will they all be around the same size? And he writes back like, I don't know. Is basically his answer. He was like, I don't think that far ahead.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay. So I waited a couple months and then wrote him again with basically the same questions. And then he did write back like single word answers. It was like, yes, yes, no. Like, yes, they'll be on wood. Yes, they'll be around the size that you're expecting. No, there won't be duplicates. So I was like, great. So I ordered a bunch. And he actually sent me way more than what I ordered, I think. But they're great, because they're just kind of a little bit of an irregular surface. And you see those panels. I wanted them just to be freestanding in case I ever needed to move studios again. I wanted to create these frames.
So you built the frames then?
I just built the frames. It's all, I built them at the same time I built these. So it's all similar. It's just poplar, And then I put some kind of absorption stuff behind them. And then they're on dowels so they can just kind of be irregular. I've never heard the space without those in there, but I can only imagine this like flat cinder block wall is going to sound
terrible. With all the mics pointing to that way, yeah.
Totally. So I think it helps. And I'm just a big fan anyway, so I think it looks cool.
Yeah, it definitely gives a unique picture of the space and everything.
Totally.
Cool. So can we talk about this rack behind if you want to go back there and show me what's, looks like you have a mixing board and then what all your preamps are and everything.
So when I started this studio, it was pretty bare bones in terms of gear. A lot of the microphones I bought initially, but I didn't have really a very good set of preamps. And what it was initially was a 16-channel Mackie board. It was Mackie Onyx pre's, which are honestly pretty good. And at the time, it was when Pro Tools required you to have very specific interfaces, either theirs, or a few other third-party ones, this Mackie board being one of them, that played nice with Pro Tools. That's what I got initially, and it was all self-contained, and it was fine. And I, I did a lot on that board. But then a friend of mine turned me on to this, which is an old Yamaha board from early '80s that are part of a larger series of Yamaha boards that were made at the time that have really great preamps that are basically API copies.
Okay.
They copy as I understand it, they copy the API schematics and put them into this thing, which is, originally is just 12 channels with, two, stereo out and a effects line and a monitor line. And, I think I've seen a lot of churches with these kinds of boards in them, smaller venues, but this was modded to have individual outs for every channel. Okay. So somebody went in and took, each preamp and went out so that it could be used the way I use it for recording. So this was what came after the Mackie board and was a total game changer because it sounds way better. And especially on drums, it's really punchy. And if you drive them a little bit, they sound really cool. Yeah. But then I started to get into this other stuff. And there's a history here so all of these other pre's, and I have a fourth one of these sitting over by the computer, but this is a company called Hazelrig Industries, which is a division of DW Fern, which is what makes this preamp. Okay. And Doug Fern is a guy who lives about an hour and a half from here, who started this company in the 90s. And all of his stuff is like very high-end tube gear, preamps, EQs, compressors, and, the kind of things that like mastering engineers love. Like, his compressor, his EQ is all you really need to master an album. And the preamps are incredible. And I play in a piano trio with Joff and George Hazelrig, who are the Hazelrig brothers behind Hazelrig Industries. Okay. And Joff Hazelrig, who's the bass player in that band, he's worked for DW Fern for a long time, building gear for them. And about, 6 years ago, they had the idea of making these Hazelrig Industry pre's, which include an EQ. So it's like a Pultec style EQ. Okay. With just high and low settings for attenuation and for boost, whatever they call it. They call it boost and cut. So it's the same preamp in the DW Fern pre's with their proprietary EQ that they built. And once they started doing that, I think the wheels started turning for Doug Fern, who's like kind of sort of wanting to retire a little bit. And so they now run the company for Doug. Doug is still very much involved, but they run DW Fern out of a shop in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where they build all the stuff and, make all the DW Fern stuff in addition to the Hazelrig Industries things. And they've expanded that line. They have a single channel compressor, which is incredible. They have a DI box that's really great. They're working on a few other things that are really cool. And lucky for me, the recording that I do with them as a trio, the trio is called the Hazelrig Brothers. And it's, on the surface, it's a jazz piano trio, but we don't really play jazz. It's more interpretations of a lot of rock music, classical music. That's basically the gist. The last album we did was the Police's Synchronicity album in its entirety, but our take on it. Yeah. And right now we're working on an album that's all Led Zeppelin, just kind of bits and pieces from the whole Led Zeppelin catalog. But when I do these recording projects with them, they pay me in preamps, which is great. That's a
good deal. Yeah.
I know, it works out great.
Yeah.
So, and in addition to the fact that they come here and do a lot of recording, they have a studio that we do our trio stuff out of where they have their acoustic piano. But they come here if they need like kind of more rock drums. They'll come here, and so we know that we've got 8 channels. I'm about to get another 4 channels actually of DW, another one of these. So I'll have 12 channels.
I saw a picture of that on Instagram when
it's a beast. It's so, and it's it's just EQs, no EQ. It's just just preamp. But 4 channels of that. So if I get another one of those, I'll have 12 channels, which I can. So then I can actually get full multi-tracks done just through the awesome tube gear, which really it's pretty remarkable what happens when it becomes cumulative with those things. It's like, sure, the one channel of it sounds great, but as soon as you start to stack them on top of each other, it's like, oh man, it's a different thing. I'm still learning about all this stuff. It's like I'm just a drummer, and I've sort of figured the rest of it out on my own. But
that was one of the things I had on my list to ask you about was kind of how your gear has evolved over the years. But we've ended up talking about it just naturally over everything as
the thing that I always assumed gear-wise was that because everyone always talks about Neve and API on drums being awesome because you can I always assume it's because of the saturation and you get this punchy beefy thing from sort of driving the amps a little bit. But the thing that you don't get from those kinds of preamps is a really fast transient capture because they're just not quick enough. And the DW Fern stuff, the headroom on these things is insane. I mean, I have trouble with a lot of them actually because I can only turn them up like a millimeter and it's too loud. It's like, they're built to kind of play especially nice with ribbon microphones, which have a really low output. So,
and then you said you had one more of those over by your desk.
Yeah, by the desk I have another one of the VLC ones, but they really are pretty remarkable sounding in that they can capture the really strong impact of a drum hit, and have it be accurate. They don't blur that attack at all like the other ones do. Now sometimes that's a cool sound you want to blur. With my crotch mic, I actually put it through 2 channels of this. So I go into one channel, then directly out into another channel, just so I can I can get a lot of distortion.
Yeah, that's a good trick. Yeah,
this sounds great.
Cool.
But for something like these, or especially a snare drum, close snare drum mic, you don't want that necessarily. You want that that attack, which you can then dial back if you need to with a compressor. But so from back here, I can run my whole system. I've got a keyboard and a mouse back here on this dirty ass table, and and a little mixer that I just run a couple. I run a mix of like just the click, the stereo mix coming from the computer. I have kind of a mix of my drums coming straight from my interface, so I don't have to deal with any latency things, with the computer. So I'm monitoring with no latency, and I can run it all from. I have this other monitor here, so I can run it all from back here, and then I hop over to the desk and do any editing or whatever from there. But it's a pretty good setup. I've tried different ways of doing this. In my old studio, I could see the main monitor from the kit a little bit better because it was smaller. So I didn't have a second monitor, but as soon as I did that, it makes it pretty easy to get a lot done from back here. Although I don't tend to do any real work on the computer from back here. It's just stopping and starting.
That's pretty much every drummer I see their studio. That's the setup they want, is all the controls right there. So then you're not jumping back and forth.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, because it could be a real pain otherwise. And I've messed around with there are things that you can get that will control your DAW from your phone or tablet or whatever, and they work fine. That technology has probably gotten so much better now that they're awesome, but I just haven't.
So what kind of interface are you running into?
Oh yeah,
over by the desk?
It's a Lynx Aurora. It's a 16-channel interface that is all I really need here. I only need 16 channels, and it's going into just a Mac Mini. Okay. It's with I don't think it was the M2 chip yet. I think it was just an M1 chip. Only, man, I mean, maybe once there's maybe been 2 or 3 times actually, that I've had other people come in and like track with me. But theoretically, I could, be doing a lot more in this room. But since it's only just me, I don't really have to deal with a lot of monitor mixes. I don't have to worry about latency things really in monitor land. I don't have an HD. So, I use Pro Tools, but I just use their, whatever they call it now, Studio or something. It's like not the HD version of it. So I'm just USB from the interface into the computer, and it works great. And it's really reliable. I think that if, next thing, I don't know if there's any reason to. I think about because there's a new generation of those Lynx converters out that maybe are a little bit better, but I don't think it really, that's the good thing about audio. The computers get faster and better, but the what you're actually capturing doesn't really change.
And it's more, the kind of the classic saying is always it's more of what's at the source, the player, the tools you're playing.
Totally.
And if that stuff's good,
oh man,
you don't need to be upgrading your interface every year if you've got all that stuff in place.
And
so,
I'd like to remind myself of that, because I could go like get real mired down in the specifics of the gear and those things. I'm lucky that, I really haven't, gotten a whole lot of new microphones in recent years, but I definitely have gotten some more preamps, which keeps it interesting, because that's part of it too. I mean, it keeps me engaged and always trying to get things to sound better and just progressing in that way. But it would be way more important to practice more, which I totally don't. I totally don't practice enough. Like I should be doing that more than I should be, changing my tom mics or whatever.
Right.
But so it's a good reminder.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. Tell people remind them again, the website, and then social media or any other way that they can find you online.
So the website is boomcrashdrumtracks.com. And my name is John O'Reilly Jr. And my Instagram is JORDrum1234. I'm not very active on Instagram. Okay. You can find me on Facebook too, because I'm old. But going to the website is probably the best way to get, and there are ways to get in contact. There's a contact form on there. All the information you would want about the studio, lots of pictures of gear and explanation of what exactly I have, and same with drums and everything. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right.